Welcome to this episode of the Common Sense Skeptic, where this month we are celebrating our 5th year as a YouTube channel. So we're going to take a break from doing the finishing touches of our reno to have some fun with you and share a bit of history for those who aren't even sure where the channel came from. Common Sense Skeptic literally came out of the lockdowns in 2020, when nobody was allowed to go anywhere or do anything, and we wound up getting into a lot of debates with people on social media about a variety of different things, including Musk's Mars plans for Starship. Eventually, after going through the same points over and over and over again with different people, we decided to instead make videos on various topics that spelled out the points we were making in a memorable way. We joked at the time about hitting 1,000 subscribers and the possibility of maybe getting monetized someday down the road. Little did we know that we'd hit 1,000 subscribers in a matter of weeks and become monetized only 3 months after our first episode aired. Thunderfoot played a huge role in reaching the critical thinking audience for us with a number of shoutouts, as did Dave at EEV Blog, and word of mouth has carried us forward from there. Today we have almost 120,000 subscribers who have watched a collective 14 million episodes from our library of 168 videos, for a combined total of 3.2 million hours of viewing. Those numbers would have seemed unachievable in the early days, but today they continue to grow. We also have you, one of the most engaged communities on YouTube, with each episode garnering a 96 to 99% approval rate and attracting hundreds, even thousands of comments outside of our live preview chat, which we do for every episode. In short, thank you very much for your continued support in this project, which has grown from a hobby into a community, one that companies now are willing to generously sponsor. In fact, today's episode is brought to you by 3wliners.com in their custom lineup of vehicle floor mats using the Vigor mold process and the safe, eco-friendly Thorex material. They've partnered up with over 20 automakers, including Volkswagen, Ford, and Chevrolet, to create perfectly fitting floor mats for more than 500 vehicle models, and they were generous enough to provide a full set for our Dodge Ram 1500. Swapping out the factory mats for these premium quality 3W floor liners lifted the interior of the cab nicely. They look very sharp, and they hug the floor higher than the factory mats did, giving more interior carpet protection. In the driver's seat, we had no curl on the 3W floor mat to worry about for pedal operation, thanks to their custom crafted perfection and the 3D scanning they use. And the deep grooves in the custom mat will help keep winter snow and slush away from our pants and shoes. 2 things that we noticed is 1, there is no new chemical smell to these things, and 2, they're very flexible right out of the box, so you don't need any adhesive to hold them down. As their tagline says, these things are made for decades of use, are dead easy to clean with a hose or power washer, and 3W offers premium floor mats for all Ram models. The 3W storefront on Amazon is partnering with Amazon Prime Days on now to bring you even better pricing on their lineup of premium custom fit 3W floor mats. You can also find them anytime at 3wliners.com to view their full lineup of products, links in the video description, and thanks again to 3W for their generous sponsorship. So as a retrospective, let's use Musk's recent Mars presentation, presented once again to his staff at Starbase rather than to the general public, just as the similar presentation was last year. And what we'll do for this episode is call back to the first 15 or so episodes produced by our channel, which dealt with so many of the shortfalls in the logic of Musk's presentations up to 2020. Now, this presentation was advertised as being the road to making life multiplanetary, which promised to give an outline of the steps required to take humans to the next planet in our solar system. Let's see what Musk had to say, what new information he had to share, and how our previous original episodes have held up over the past 5 years.
Gateway to Mars. So here we are. Here we are at the newly incorporated Starbase, Texas. This is the first new city made in America in, I think, quite a few decades. At least that's what I'm told.
So we're kicking off the speech and going right into disprovable nonsense. While Starbase was granted its incorporation by the state of Texas, in complete violation of the original agreement that allowed SpaceX to operate Falcon launches in support of the ISS from Boca Chica, it is by no means the only new city made in America in quite a few decades, as Musk falsely claims here. A simple search shows that even since 2020, there have been many new cities incorporated in the U.S. Mountain House, California, Empire, Minnesota, Mableton, Georgia, Erda, Utah, Exis Junction, Vermont, Gluckstadt, Mississippi, Loxley, Alabama, and Ellinger, Texas, to name a few. So Musk can't even say it's been decades since Texas got itself a brand new incorporated city. fake claim all day long, pawned off on, at least that's what I was told. Moving on.
And very cool name. And it's named that because it is where we're going to develop the technology necessary to take humanity and civilization and life as we know it to another planet for the first time in the 4.5 billion year history of Earth.
So there's one dab already on the Musk Mars bullshit bingo card. It's not a Starship presentation without Musk mentioning the 4.5 billion year history of Earth, for which Homo sapiens have only existed for 300,000 of those years, according to new fossil information. And the oldest known civilization is the Sumerians, dated back to 4000 BCE. So maybe that reference is a little more apt and accurate when referring to humanity striving to inhabit other planets. Keep your ears open for other entries on the card based on every other Starship presentation Musk has ever done.
So Starbase started off as basically a sandbar. That's the original sort of Mad Max rocket. So yeah, not that long ago, there was basically nothing here. And in a space of about 5 or 6 years, thanks to the incredible work of the SpaceX team, we've built a small city. And we've built 2 gigantic launch pads and a gigantic rocket factory for a gigantic rocket.
Those of you who have followed the channel since the early days know that this statement made by Musk is absolute crap. Since the sleepy community of Boca Chica was originally developed in 1967 by John Caputa as Kennedy Shores, was wiped out by a hurricane, and was in the process of being gentrified as a retirement community that residents called a heaven on earth, surrounded on all sides by either protected wildlife sanctuaries, state parks, or beautiful beaches. But the state of Texas has done an absolute shit job enforcing the protection of those lands, and allowed Musk to run roughshod over not only the area, but their people as well, who have been forced out of their homes using a form of eminent domain. And all these things that Musk is bragging about building, again, the original plan for Musk bringing SpaceX to this part of Texas was to build a very small launch facility, small footprint, for Falcon launches in support of the ISS. That's what Texas thought they were getting. Starship was never mentioned, and neither was a massive manufacturing facility, nor a destructive rapid iteration testing program for the monstrous Starship that has on several occasions destroyed part of the wetlands that are key to the central migration corridor for North and South American birds. We covered all of this in detail and even submitted it into the official record of local town halls in our Musk versus the FAA series.
So you can actually come and visit because our entire production facility and launch site are on a public highway. See the rocket pretty close up. Then we progress to where we are now, Starbase 2025. So we're now at the point where we can produce a ship roughly every 2 or 3 weeks. Now, we don't always produce the ship every 2 or 3 weeks because we are making design upgrades. But ultimately, we're aiming for the ability to produce 1,000 ships a year, so 3 ships a day.
You have to wonder about the people there listening to him speak. These are all SpaceX employees, every last one of them, and Musk is telling them information they would absolutely already know, which is why the background noise is louder than the audience response. But let's focus on the last statement, where Musk is claiming they will build 3 Starships per day, 1,000 per year, because this is a number we'll put to task later in the episode. What exactly is it that Musk believes he will be churning out at a rate of 3 per day? An empty shell that still requires outfitting with engines and everything else? Or a fully kitted spaceship capable of taking humans off-world with all the systems and amenities required to keep them alive and thriving? Neither of them sounds plausible. The second choice sounds like pure insanity. And having recently undertaken major renovation projects, we have a new appreciation for the 90-10 or 90-90 rule of project completion, which states that 90% of the progress will be made in the first 10% of the allotted time, and the remaining 10% of progress, the finer details, will eat up 90% of the available schedule. Let's use an example everybody can relate to, building a house. Once ground is broken on a new build, pouring the foundation and building the house to a state called lockup, which creates the home's profile, style, and interior spaces, can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. But after that, there is a massive checklist yet to be undertaken, and each line item has its own 90-10 breakdown. With gyprock, what you all apparently call drywall, hanging the sheetrock is the part of the job that goes by quickly. It's the mudding and sanding, and mudding and sanding and mudding and sanding, and then priming the walls that takes the majority of the time to accomplish. For electricians, running the wire throughout the house can be accomplished quickly if they have appropriate diagrams, but then the connections at either end are the ones that tend to eat up the clock. When you're painting the walls, expect to spend far more time cutting in corners and ceilings than you ever will rolling out the wall panel. If Musk is trying to tell people here that he is going to be pumping out 3 fully kitted Starships daily, there is a level of delusion that is unmatched in the industry, even if he says it's only the 3 shells at a rate of 3 per day. Let's put it another way. Boeing 787 takes in the neighborhood of 50 days for a single unit, and that is once after all the parts are built by international partners and staged in the build hangar ready to go, with some of those parts by themselves taking many months to build. So, suffice to say, the build cadence Musk is announcing here likely ranks very high on the Pinocchio scale. And of course, that's before we even start talking about boosters.
That's our Gigabay. So we're expanding integration to produce 1,000 Starships per year. That hasn't been built yet, but we're building it. That is a truly enormous structure. That'll be one of the biggest structures, I think by some measures, the biggest structure in the world. And it's designed for 1,000 Starships a year.
This sounds like more blatant BS, as Musk regularly makes these biggest in the world, best in the world statements. But without dimensions to verify a claim, it's kind of hard to know one way or the other. So let's break down the image to get an idea of the scale. The one dimension we have a relatively good idea about is the height of Starship. Of course, this is always changing, but we're going to use 170 feet tall, which is about 52.1 meters, and the added height of the transport crawler will factor into a plus minus here. We'll make the height of the bay door the same height as the Starship that just exited the bay, and the roof is then 25% higher than that, for an estimated height of 212.5 feet or 65.1 meters. The rest of the building not really visible and the angles are sharp, so we'll treat the building as a cube, with a volume then of 960,000 cubic feet or 27,000 cubic meters. In comparison, the Empire State Building has 1 million cubic meters, which is about 37 million cubic feet, or perhaps more fittingly, we should use the Boeing Everett factory, the largest building in the world by interior volume, boasting 472 million cubic feet or about 13.3 million cubic meters, on a footprint covering 98.3 acres or 39.8 hectares. By comparison, this Gigabay factory might as well be the tiny home that Musk said he lived in. It's certainly not the biggest building in the world by any stretch, no matter what the rest of the complex looks like.
We're also building a Gigabay in Florida, so we'll have 2 facilities, one in Texas and one in Florida. It's actually difficult to gauge the size of these buildings because you need a human for scale. When you see how tiny a human is next to that building, you realize just how enormous it is.
This is textbook cart before the horse thinking, in that they're making all these plans for factories and now multiple locations for a ship that is unproven on 9 flights, that has now, as of July 19th, detonated on the ground, obliterating the system's only test stand at Massey's. It is not prudent in any way to make plans of any sort for this vehicle until such time as the machine can reach orbit safely. It is nonsensical for SpaceX to be planning billions of dollars in capex when Starship cannot even launch and conduct a mission fully while empty, never mind the inclusion of any meaningful payload.
So when we look at our build comparison vehicles per year, Boeing and Airbus making airplanes, will be making at some point probably as many Starships for Mars as Boeing and Airbus make commercial airplanes. So this is really at a scale, an enormous scale. Each Starship is bigger than a 747 or an A380. Like, it's truly enormous.
Here's one of those claims that goes right back to episode 1, July 2020. The claim that Starship is bigger than an Airbus A380. Another provably false claim. The A380 is the largest commercial passenger jet in service today. The interior configuration differs according to customer, with the A380-800 being configured to haul 800 people per trip with a top range of 15,200 kilometers and a top design speed just short of Mach 1. The A380 has a length of 72.72 meters, 7 meters short of its wingspan. So if you take an A380 and stand it on its tail and stood a Starship next to it, there would be a difference of about 20 meters or 60 feet, favoring the jet. Now the Starship is a little wider at 9 meters, compared to the A380 at 7.15 across and 8.4 meters top to bottom. But the 30% difference in length more than makes up for it, and gives the Airbus A380 an interior pressurized fuselage volume of 2,100 cubic meters. Starship's volume spec has changed over the years as modifications to the CGI model have been made larger or smaller, When we released our episode 1, the BFR Starship in Musk presentation was sitting at 825 cubic meters, which was 2/5 of the Airbus's 2100, yet the frame claimed even back then this same false information, that it was larger than the Airbus's cabin. It is larger than the volume of the main deck, but smaller than the combined space, including the upper deck, even when the updated Starship spec is for 1,000 cubic meters. 5 years onward, and Musk has still not corrected that erroneous talking point.
And then in terms of Starlink satellites, the version 3 satellites, making on the order of 5,000 a year, maybe at some point closer to 10,000 a year. And those Starlink V3 satellites are each the size of roughly a 737. That compares to the B-24 bomber in World War II.
Okay, so if each of the V3 Starlink satellites is roughly the size of a 737, how exactly are they planning on deploying these things to LEO? Are they somehow planning to shunt them through the Pez dispenser, whose door they can't even get to work properly? Or are they going back to the Pac-Man type cargo deployment door as published back in early days? And if these satellites are being delivered to LEO, expect every single one of them to fall out of the sky within the next 5 years.
Now, it's still small compared to Tesla, and Tesla will probably be doing double or triple that volume in the future. So it just puts things into perspective that it is actually possible to build a vast number of interplanetary starships. And even when you can compare things on the tonnage standpoint, Tesla is still, and other car companies are still building far more complex manufactured tonnage than SpaceX, which just really is a way of saying that it's very achievable. These numbers, while they are insanely high by traditional space standards, are achievable by humans because they have been achieved in other industries.
So to clarify, Musk is telling the people currently building the Starship hulls that building them at the same pace as an automotive assembly line at Tesla is totally achievable, and that is his goal. Here's the problem. Tesla builds crappy cars. According to the initial quality surveys, IQS, near the bottom of the barrel every year. According to the independent research firm IC Cars, using IIHS data, Tesla is the deadliest brand on the road as well. And the stainless abomination at Tesla, the Cybertruck, has already seen its demand fall off to a couple hundred per week compared to the 2 million reservations that Musk gloated about prior to the delivery event in November of 2023. So maybe Tesla product and quality control as a metric against mass producing a ship slated to carry people to and from the moon and Mars without exploding or failing in any regard isn't the brightest move here. And now we're moving on to that roadmap promised in the title of the presentation.
Progress is measured by the timeline to establishing a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. That's how we're gauging our progress here at Starbase. Especially in the early days of Starship, each launch is about learning more and more about what's needed to make life multiplanetary and to improve Starship to the point where it can be taking ultimately hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to Mars.
We've lost track of how many times we've refuted Musk's claim of carrying hundreds or thousands or millions of people to Mars aboard Starship. We demonstrated the volume constraints of Starship and the number of people it could possibly support as far back as episode 1. We've done it by demonstrating what it would take to feed them in episode 6, Feeding a Colony. And we've been waiting since October of 2020 for Musk to release detailed interior designs of a Mars mission craft that would support his 100 people for the journey and the colonization work period. With very simple math, using ISS astronaut data as a comparable, we demonstrated how the 100 people and their food requirements alone would exceed the 100 tons payload capacity of Starship. And the statement that every Starship flight to date has been to learn more and more about what is required to make life multiplanetary is laughable, considering they haven't recovered a single Starship intact, because they don't know how to land it on uneven or loose terrain like they would have to do on the Moon or Mars. But it's the next claim that truly shows the delusional nature of Musk and his Mars venture.
We can take anyone who wants to go to Mars, we can take to Mars and bring all of the equipment necessary to make Mars self-sustaining so Mars can grow by itself in a worst-case scenario, getting to the point where the fundamental fork in the road for human destiny is where Mars can continue to grow even if the supply ships from Earth stop coming for any reason. At that point, we've achieved civilizational resilience where Mars can potentially come to the rescue of Earth if something goes wrong, or maybe Earth could come to the rescue of Mars. But having two planets that are both self-sustaining and strong, I think is going to be incredibly important for the long-term survival of civilization.
Okay, we let that one run a little long, but the BS was flowing from him so smoothly, it seemed a shame to cut him off. Back to the beginning, where Musk said anybody who wants to go to Mars will be able to go. This suggestion from Musk is not new. He's made it for more than a decade now, long before he showed anyone the MCT ITS BFR. And although he didn't state it here, Musk has in the past mentioned ticket prices of $200,000 per person, then $100,000 per person, which would include a free trip back home if things didn't work out for you. He even offered a form of indentured servitude for those people who want to go but couldn't afford it. We challenge any licensed psychiatrist to state, on the record and at risk of their own reputation, that random people off the street would all be viable candidates to be in-transit astronauts and off-world colonists. After touching on this topic in an earlier episode, we released episode 11 in February 2021, titled Starship vs. Submarine, which laid bare the physical and psychological screening conducted on sailors just so they can serve aboard a submarine. We readdressed the topic again in the Colonizing Mars series, released May 2021, because it is blatantly obvious that persons making the interplanetary jaunt to Mars to start anew would have to be nearly perfect specimens of physical and mental health. Human beings are fragile in nature, easily broken in body and spirit. Slight variances in the environment outside our Goldilocks zones prove deadly. Humans can die from consuming too much water, causing cells to swell and lyse, or not enough water, causing organs to shut down. From breathing in too little or too much oxygen in our breathable air-gas mix, the difference between hypoxia and hyperoxia. In weightlessness, the human heart shrinks, muscles atrophy, and bones begin to shed calcium almost immediately. Space is not for the faint of heart or frail of body, and is certainly not for everybody. And we laid all this out in episodes 4 years ago. But Musk continued on to fantasize about Mars at some point in the future coming to the aid of Earth, which is absolutely insane. First, no matter what level of outpost is eventually sent to Mars, it will absolutely be completely dependent upon resupply from home, just as Antarctica research stations still are. Second, any event affecting our solar system, including Musk's doomsday scenario of the sun enveloping the Earth billions of years from now, will also adversely affect Mars as the next planet over. Third, what other emergency scenario is Musk envisioning here that would result in the possible rescue of Earth by Mars, considering the fact that Mars is 140 million miles or 225 million kilometers away, given the arc of the home and transfer orbit when the planets are 34 million miles or 55 million kilometers apart at their closest, and 249 million miles or 401 million kilometers away from each other at their furthest. Considering that no catastrophe on Earth, short of a planet-killing asteroid direct hit, would reduce the viability of Earth for humans below that of Mars, it's very difficult to imagine any scenario where this statement would hold water.
I think any given civilization is likely to last maybe, 10 times longer, maybe much longer, if it is a multi-planet civilization than if it is a single-planet civilization. Because there's always some chance that us humans could do something crazy, like World War III, hopefully not, but it's possible, or that there could be some natural event like meteors or supervolcanoes or something that we don't expect. If we only have one planet, then that could be curtains. But if we've got two planets, we keep going.
Addressing the nonsense claim that a multiplanetary civilization, according to Musk, would survive 10 times longer than one that survives on one planet alone, we searched and there are 0 scientific publications that would back up the claim that Musk obviously yanked straight out of his butt. But one thing we can say is that even if Earth did suffer World War III and a supervolcano event and any meteor impact short of a global killer, Earth would still be more inhabitable for humans than Mars, owing, if nothing else, to our breathable atmosphere, our accustomed level of gravity, the availability of fresh water, and the protection from solar and galactic radiation provided by the Van Allen belts.
And then we go beyond Mars, ultimately, to maybe the asteroid belt, the moons of Jupiter, and beyond, and ultimately to other star systems. And we can be out there among the stars, making science fiction no longer fiction.
Ah yes, as if living on Mars wouldn't be desolate and soul-crushing enough, now Musk has people occupying random rocks in the 550 million kilometer, 344 million mile gap between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, or on the moons of Jupiter. where especially on the Galilean moons, humans would die in short order simply from the radiation coming from the gas giant. What's more, for someone who keeps harping about solar energy, he seems blissfully unaware that Jupiter only receives about 4% of the solar energy compared to Earth, making solar panels all but useless. With Jupiter being more than 10 times further away from Earth than Mars, colonists would be in transit for possibly upwards of 5 years to get to the moons of Jupiter if alignments were optimal, only to get fried by radiation upon arrival. And our episode 10 from December of 2020, Radiation Shielding, dealt with what it would take to mitigate a fraction of the radiation that astronauts would be subjected to. Musk then talks about beyond Jupiter, but things only get worse the further out you go, especially in terms of travel time, logistics, and solar energy. And then he goes so far as to suggest visiting other star systems. Now, it's not very often that we'll make a statement here that almost everybody can agree on, but there should be fairly unanimous agreement across the board when we say that there is no reality where Starship is going to visit Proxima Centauri with living human beings aboard.
So in order to achieve this goal, we have to make rapidly reusable rockets so that the cost per ton to Mars is as low as possible. It's actually 4 hours, or it's like a pirate. Rapidly reusable, reliable rockets. Congrats to the SpaceX team on making incredible progress on catching a giant rocket. So it's really mind-blowing that the SpaceX team has been able to catch the largest flying object ever made multiple times, using a very novel method of catching it out of the air with giant chopsticks. Yeah, congrats again, that was an incredible achievement. So the reason we are catching it in this way, which has never been done before, in order to make the rocket rapidly reusable. So if the Super Heavy booster, which is gigantic, it's like 30 feet in diameter, if it were to land with landing legs on a landing pad, we would then have to pick it up, stow the legs, and put it back in the launch pad. And that's quite difficult to transport such a large thing. But if we catch it with the same tower that it's used to put it in the mount to begin with, that is the best case outcome for rapid reuse. So it literally gets caught by the same arms that placed it in the launch ring, and then it is placed back in the launch ring immediately. So in principle, the Super Heavy booster can be reflown within an hour of landing. It comes back in about 5 or 6 minutes, one way or another. It gets caught by the tower arms, placed back in the launch mount, and then you can refill propellant in about 30 to 40 minutes and place a ship on top of it, and in principle, refly the entire booster every hour.
So, to be clear, a 1-hour turnaround time on a massive rocket booster with 33 engines using cryogenic propellants that can create thermal fatigue in the 304L stainless being used to build the hull, which doubles as the tank walls. However, an hour, including the amount of time spent refilling the propellant, leaves mere minutes to inspect the craft, its 33 Raptors, the flap operability, the insulation lining that mitigates the thermal stress across the hull and cryo tanks, and any other number of systems or failure points across the entire craft. Yeah, we're not buying that for $1 due to Super Heavy's performances to date. The first time Mechazilla caught Super Heavy was on IFT-5 in October 2024. While the catch was good, despite very nearly being aborted at last second, Booster 12 was on fire while being suspended from the tower, with flames shooting out sideways from what would be the top of the engine compartment. IFT-6, Booster 13 did not return to the tower, and splashed down instead in the Gulf of Mexico, marking a step backwards. That was due to damage to the tower during launch. And IFT-7 saw Booster 14 come in steeper than the previous catch, but it narrowly avoided contact with the tower, and it was reflown 4 months later, following a full refurbishment that included swapping out 4 of the 33 Raptors. This obviously would not have been completed within the 20 minutes allowed for inspection, considering a 40-minute refilling schedule and an hourly turnaround. And when Booster 14 was reflown in May of 2025, there was no attempt to recover it at all. In fact, the vehicle failed structurally before its intended splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico, but there's no clean video of that event 6/17 into flight. So this really contradicts Musk's belief that the vehicle will be able to launch every hour after a quick look over and refilling the cryopropellants. This is one of those extraordinary claims that will require extraordinary evidence, and the only way this statement will ever become credible is if he can actually pull it off successfully. But so far, it is not looking good.
Maybe every 2 hours to give it a little bit of extra time. But let's just say it's in the limit of rapid reuse. The next thing we need to do is catch the ship too. So we haven't done this yet, but we will. So that's what we hope to demonstrate later this year, maybe as soon as 2 or 3 months from now. And then the ship would be placed on top of the booster, refilled with propellant, and flown again. With the ship, it takes a bit longer because it's got to orbit Earth a few times until the ground track comes back over the launch pad. But the ship is also intended to be reflown multiple times per day.
Now it's the ship's turn to be exaggerated, since Musk declares it too will be flown multiple times per day. In this case, we have to assume he's talking about the tanker variant, as there would be no reason to fly a human-rated Starship multiple times per day, but of course, he doesn't clarify this. And he says the idea for Starship is to come right back to the launch mount it came from, just like the booster does. But that doesn't seem particularly well thought out, since the booster will be sitting somewhere nearby, within reach of the Mechazilla arms, as the Starship Raptors are firing in the same area to steady it into the chopsticks. But the other part of the Starship capture that's more concerning is the flight path it must take. With the booster, there's a boost-back burn over the Gulf of Mexico that gives the vehicle a clear path back to Boca Chica. But as Musk mentioned, the Starship will have to stay in orbit until the path comes back over the site, and that means descending over land, likely over populated areas, and let's be honest, Starship has been burnt to a crisp on every attempt that it didn't completely fail. And as a falling ember, it is only ever one weld failure away from an RUD. Starbase, located at 26 degrees north of the equator, must hit the gap between Florida and Cuba, which lines it up for an equatorial orbit. Here we have the launch trajectory map from IFT-1. Of course, that one never really made it out of the gate, but from this you can see how the ship was to travel from Boca Chica to its dedicated landing zone off the coast of Hawaii. You can also see, if you continue the arc, how the ship will have to approach Boca Chica from the west. Not only is it going to be flying over populated areas, it would be flying over Mexican populated areas, starting with crossing the Baja Peninsula, then transiting the entirety of Mexico, then likely crossing the Rio Grande into the US somewhere on this map. And as you can tell, it will be impossible for that craft to not be flying over densely populated areas on approach to the OLM it came from. This was not an issue when Boca Chica was supposed to be playing host to the proven Falcon system, upon which Texas based its accommodation of SpaceX at Boca Chica. The upper stage of Falcon never comes back to the pad, and the booster would have come back in from the Gulf. So one has to wonder, has anybody in either Texas or Mexico seen what Musk has planned for Starship re-entry? Because at last report, Mexico was already pissed off with Musk for littering their coastline with Starship detritus. Maybe somebody should tell them now, before the Mexicans are just expected to accept Starship components raining down on the citizens instead of just washing up on their beaches. While you're cracking open Google Earth to track the incoming flight path, we're going to cut the episode into a two-parter, because we're only halfway through the Musk presentation, and we're 30 minutes deep into this episode already. So part 2 will be coming out next week, and we'll be looking for your comments and feedback on part 1.